see if we get a lot of people on.
Hey, Jamie.
Hey, David.
Hello, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning. We're just going to give another minute or two and then we'll get started. We're just continuing to let people in to the workshop.
Jamie, did you read some of the comments from the public about the dam removal?
Yes, I'm very steeped in that topic.
Yeah, there's some very lot of history and flowery writing.
So I'll just preface for everybody, if you didn't hear, but we are going to record this meeting. So we're recording now and we'll make it publicly available so that you can use it for future use if you want to refresh your memory on any of the topics covered here, or you want to have others learn about this resource.
I think we look good. I can continue to let people in as we keep going, but I think we've got a majority of the people here.
Perfect. All right. Jamie, you want me to start?
Yes, please.
Okay, great. Well, welcome everybody. I know that I've been anxiously awaiting this opportunity. We've talked about this for months and probably almost a year. And now we're at a point where we actually have some phenomenal information to share. But before we get going, we would like to do a roll call. Looks like we have quite a few people here. For those of you who are not used to my typical roll call during stormwater coalitions, I'll just go over it quickly. So what I'll do is I'll go alphabetically by affiliation. And if you could just unmute and announce your full name, that would be greatly appreciated. If I happen to forget you, my apologies. Please don't take it personally. And I think there's somebody, if you could mute, we're getting some background, Tom. All right, I think it's all set now. So I'll go through and then at the end, I will just give another opportunity if I have missed anyone, but feel free to also put your name and affiliation in the chat as well. So I'm going to try to go through this pretty quickly because we have a great lineup of speakers, but I will start with AECom, Allenstown, Amherst, Atkinson, Auburn,
Actually,
Bedford.
Sorry, this is Matt Monahan. I'm actually on for Allenstown. So.
Oh, perfect. Thank you, Matt. I was getting to Central New Hampshire next, but great. Thank you.
That's all.
Bedford.
Gene
Brandon
Walker.
Bover. Oh, sorry, Gene.
That's okay.
So
She
we
got
have-
us.
Thank you. Danville. Dover. Durham. Exeter. Oh, and I have a note there from Craig Durrett in Derry. Yes, I so wonderfully forgot Derry. Sorry, Craig. Geo Insight.
Megan Dalton with Geo Insight.
Christine Binger with GeoInsight.
Alex Vizino with GeoInsight.
And Jonathan Menier as well.
Goffstown. Greenland. Hampstead. Hampton,
Joe Lynch and Campbell on collectively one screen.
Hazen and Sawyer,
Joanna Sullivan, please, and Sawyer.
Hollis, so Tom, I don't know if somebody from Hollis is trying to speak. There's some background going on right now. Hooksett, Hoyle Tanner and Associates,
Michael Trank,
Hudson, Kingston, Laconia, Lee, Litchfield, Londonderry.
John Trotter, Town of Londonderry.
Great. And I just saw a note, as far as Hooksett, Tom Bertula is available and attending. Manchester,
Ben Lumstead,
Manchester, VA, Merrimack,
Kevin Anderson.
Milford.
Jason Cleghorn, Milford, sorry.
Nope, I'm sorry, Jason.
And Lincoln Daly also from Milford.
Milton. Nashua.
Nashua is here. They said so in the chat.
Thank you. I see Amy Gill. Nashua Regional Planning Commission.
Sarah Siskavich here.
Emma Rarick here.
New Hampshire DES, I'll start. Deb Loisel.
Tom Swenson,
Katie Zink.
And
Steve
Ben Steve
Landry.
here as well.
Oh, so we have Ben Sweeney and Steve Landry as well.
Sally Soul.
Great. New Hampshire DOT. Newmarket. Newton. Northampton. Pelham. All right, and I see a note here, Dan Hudson from Nashua is here. Pembroke,
DJ Arathis.
Plastow. All right, we just have a chat come in too. Matt Scruton from Greenland.
and Dina Hoffman's here from Pelham as well.
Thank you. Portsmouth. Raymond. Rochester. Rockingham Regional Planning Commission.
Rob Prine and John Rowden.
Rollinsford. Rye, I see a message from Dennis McCarthy. Also Durham, April is joining us. Tom, I think I missed someone else. Salem,
Lindsay Butler.
Sandown. Seabrook. Somersworth. We have Amber Hall from Somersworth. Southern New Hampshire Regional Planning Commission. Stantec.
Yeah, Mike Leach from Stantec.
Stratford County. Stratford Regional Planning Commission. Stratham. TEC. Underwood Engineers. UNH.
Dave Boley is here.
Will Powers.
James Cool.
Daniel McAdam.
VHB. Weston and Sampson.
Andrew Wojak.
Wilton.
Caroline Pasalakwa is here too.
Oh, sorry about that.
Michelle Dakota for Wilton.
Wyndham. Wright Pierce.
Good morning. This is Britt Ekstrom, and Christine Reinhardt is joining us as well.
Great. Okay, so I've gone through my whole list. Again, if there is anybody else that I have forgotten, again, my apologies. But maybe you could just either put your name and affiliation in the chat or announce yourself right now.
Hey, Deb, Dave Sullivan in Windham. I think I might have been on mute. Did you catch me?
I didn't, but now I did.
All right, thanks.
All right, Dave. We have Emily DeFranco from CEI. All right. I think in the interest of time, we'll get going. I have to say, I'm really impressed. I see on my screen there are 58 individuals. Really excited to have you all here. And it looks like we have some folks, somebody from Cape Cod and a couple representatives from EPA as well. So just very quickly before we get started, we have two wonderful presenters today. But Tom Swenson, my colleague at DES, is going to be monitoring the chat and facilitating the Q&A. And what we're going to ask, if you don't mind, is to hold your questions till the end. However, if there is something that will be helpful to, you think, everybody, or there's a clarifying question as the presenters are presenting, please feel free to put it into the chat, and then Tom will politely interject and ask either Jamie or Sally to address the question then. But we're going to be addressing questions either through the chat. So I encourage you throughout the presentations just to note those. And then it also will give an opportunity for people to raise their hands and ask questions as well. But we're really, really excited to be here. I'm extremely grateful to have these two individuals present today, because I think you're going to find that there's going to be some very critical and useful information and ways that you can meet many of your MS4 requirements. So without further ado, I am going to introduce our presenters today. Jamie Houle, who is with the UNH Stormwater Center. He is the director there. And then my colleague and friend, Sally Sewell, who is a watershed supervisor at the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services.
Great.
Thank you, Deb.
Thanks, Deb. So first question, hopefully you can all see my screen. All right. So yeah, I'm not exactly sure where the matrix theme came from, but I think it's fitting because, we are talking about developing an artificial landscape and deriving a pollutant load from that. So we stuck with it. And I just wanted to remind people that we've been other places with much less fitting, probably memes related to movies. I still can't explain where the Dances with Wolves came from. That came from the deep in the brain of Ted Deers, I think. And of course, this segues to another project of ours that's near and dear to our hearts, and that's PTAP. So, this is pretty much the precursor of deriving any type of load to go to a BMP, then to take credit for those attendant reductions. So as far as first things first, where to get this information, this is now housed on the DES website. So if you go, I just Google New Hampshire DES Stormwater Blog, and when you get there, there'll be a tab that says resources, and you'll see all this data. And we'll do a live demonstration in a little bit. We will also make this presentation available. I'm not sure if the hyperlinks stay active in those presentations, but they are online. I wanted to talk just briefly about the data development because we use the term hotspots. And I mean, we started talking about this in 2012, I believe, when we started trying to derive some way of prioritizing pollutant loads. But this is an age-old practice. So anybody who's been involved in developing watershed management plans, this is really the first step in deriving that load from your drainage area. These are also called hydrologic response units. That's HRUs. That is what we are developing here. And the difference is just how we aggregate the data. And there are some efforts regionally to try and streamline this, since basically we're all using the same baseline information. And I say that there are some variations, particularly with respect to the like impervious cover and the quality of that data, whether you're deriving it from the more recent aerial photography and LiDAR data at a higher resolution, or if you're deriving it from a satellite data. All that said, we can still mold all this together, and it's really just creating a trail of breadcrumbs that can transparently demonstrate how we did this and provide some replicability. Because in effect, that's how, you know, we want to keep that transparency and that consistency across the line. So what we do here, and we have our own, every state is going to have their own land use categories that are all embodied in those land use classifications within your GIS data set. And I'm not providing these here so that you can see them, just that you can see the vastness of the land use categories. We have over 60 different land use categories that we can identify through our GIS database. Yet we have 6 real pollutant load export rates associated with land use classes that we can quantify. And again, this ranges from between 6 and 10. In Massachusetts, residential tends to get broken up into low, medium, and high density residential, and those would have different pollutant load export rates. In New Hampshire, and this is something we work out ahead of time with EPA to make sure that our crosswalk, and this is what I call a crosswalk, how we segue our 60, 70 land use classes in, squeeze them and fit them into these 6 categories that we're going to track and account for. How we do that, again, should be transparent, and we should be able to have a list. So we develop a crosswalk list, and at any point in time, we can go back and say, all right, more up-to-date data has demonstrated that we need to change this classification. So as long as we're consistent, that level of change is relatively easy, right? That's just a distinction, and it's responsive to the state, the current state and the future state of the science. Again, nothing is really new. We are not inventing anything here. We're using pollutant load export rates that come right out of our permit. And so these are pretty much the same if you look between New Hampshire and Massachusetts, as they are all created regionally by EPA Region 1, and they are embodied in the New Hampshire and Massachusetts MS4 permits. So again, trying to be consistent, trying to be transparent, and create a baseline data set that we can start to do higher end accounting as we move to implementation. So one of the things that we're really hoping to usher along is more implementation. Historically, we spent vast amounts of money and time and effort developing plans and redeveloping plans for every community, right, that had some type of impairment. And invariably, there would always be changes and assumptions about how these HRUs are put together. And so what we're trying to at least do is create a starting line that everybody, that's common, that everybody can start from, a level playing field, something to a platform or a foundation upon which to build a program. And we all understand and are in agreement that this foundation is rooted in the best application of these HRU approaches. So this is here in New Hampshire. It's everywhere else in New England. And there's regional opportunities here to build on this, I think, as we, as the science of this really advances. So for the most part, when we started off, we used, I should go back, we used the Parcel. We spent a long time chasing after the Parcel data and finally getting it. And we used the Parcel as our unit of analysis. If we had it to do over again, we likely would have developed HRU based on, say, just a spatial area, like a 1 meter by 1 meter resolution. And then we can overlay that with the Parcel data. So there's a way to layer this such that it's much more manageable. And so we feel like there's a lot of operability that's added using the Parcels. But again, if we had it to do over again, we might have built a foundation with a spatial HRU and then overlaid the Parcel data on top of that. So this is all learning in the process. And I think in various parts of New England, we're all kind of going through this. And I think a long-term target is to develop some consistency around this. And hopefully that's what these efforts will start to do, because there's a tremendous amount of utility in this information. So one of the things we realized early on is that when you use a Parcel to cut into these land use derived loadings, the bigger the Parcel, the more your pollutant. So what we're producing in these maps, as you'll see later, is a pounds per year. And it includes the acreage and the land uses bisected by that Parcel ID layer. And so we'll be looking at pounds overall, and it's really pounds of pollutant that can be generated by that Parcel. And traditionally, we've looked at sediment, phosphorus, and total nitrogen. We also have the ability, as the science advances, to include other parameters as well that we develop these pollutant load export rates for. So next in line might be something like bacteria and others. So once we're consistently moving in the right direction and all in the same direction, and there's this kind of crosswalk of transparency, we can substitute these additional pollutants and additional features as they become available. So early on, we knew we needed to add another feature to this assessment that could allow us to differentiate. I guess the best way to put it is how to differentiate manageable load from non-manageable load. So if you look at some of the early maps, large tracts of area denoted large pounds per year in potential pollutant development. But again, we were never interested, nor were we even remotely intrigued by conservation land. So there's nothing in this analysis that would say focus on conservation land with best management practices. Obviously, that's not our target. And so we inserted a impervious cover feature class so that we could start to sort by impervious cover, because we feel that impervious cover really becomes a surrogate for pollutant loading, manageable pollutant loading, to put it more precisely. So you'll see that as we move through the sortable features in the attribute tables that are developed by these mapping products. So I wanted to just jump right into an example. Now, can you still see this website? Okay, good. So here is the website. You can get this by Googling New Hampshire MS4 stormwater blog or New Hampshire DES stormwater blog, whatever, or you probably have this embedded in one of your favorite classes in your bookmarks. There's a tremendous amount of resource here, not only hotspot maps, but everything else related to MS4. So today we're going to focus on this tab here, which is New Hampshire Resources. And you can see you have a winter maintenance tab, or you have these pollutant load hotspot maps. So I'm going to click on the hotspot maps, and to the left here, we see the list of towns that Deb announced on the roll call. So these are all the regulated MS4 communities. And they also include, I believe, some of the Great Bay communities as well. So you'll see 3 resources here for every town: pollutant load summary spreadsheet, prioritized load summary spreadsheet, and this priority ranked parcel summary report. And we'll go over each of those. So right now, I think what I'd like to do is just go through an example of what the top 2 look like. And I think we all agreed that we pick on Salem. So if you click on the pollutant load summary sheet, these are the original hotspot maps. Can you see that now? Does that, you should be seeing an Excel form. Okay, great. Sometimes when you pop up new windows that you have to refresh the share screen. So Sally and I over the years have had way too much fun with these data sets. There is no end in what you can start to do to prioritize different land uses, to prioritize different areas to focus on within your community. I mean, this basically is only limited by the time that you have to fool around with these types of maps. And I'm going to quickly introduce all the stuff here and then move on to some of the value added products that we've developed. So essentially what we're doing is we're using town name. This is the New Hampshire GIS ID. We have a parcel ID. And then we have these flags here. So these are some of the sortable features. We have sorts by town-owned lands. And I should preface this with, the data is only as good as the quality of the data in GIS. So this is really a baseline configuration. And we'll get into that a little bit more. And what I mean to say is some of the town-owned lands are not town-owned lands. Some of the conservation lands are not conservation lands. So, this is basically based on the quality of the data that exists in the GIS repository. The Ms4 flag is basically, we map the urbanized area as denoted by the census and then put a flag on there in case it's useful to sort by the Ms4 flag and or the urbanized area. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Then we have acreage, and this is total parcel acreage. And again, we use the parcel as our unit of analysis, largely because our feeling was that when a municipality was looking to prioritize land use areas, they were going to be looking at properties. And in fact, we got that right from the Ms4 permit itself that has a requirement to review and prioritize town-owned lands for retrofitability. So that's the basic reason why we chose the parcel level. And then this is your area of impervious cover. Because again, the impervious cover we're using as a surrogate for pollutants. And invariably, there aren't many situations that I'm aware of where the maximum impervious cover does not lead to the maximum manageable phosphorus, nitrogen, and sediment. So those instances would be where there are large tracts of land, let's say, that are conserved, you'll have a big mark, but we're using impervious cover as that distinction between manageable and unmanageable loads. And then we have a score. And again, these units are in pounds per year. So this is the pounds per year that are generated. The other thing to note here is you'll see it at the top line, we have these big tracts of land, big tracts of impervious cover, and big scores of sediment, phosphorus and nitrogen. These, you'll also note, do not have a parcel ID or a New Hampshire GIS ID. These largely are the roads and the transportation infrastructure that are depicted in this analysis as a polygon. So the entire area of the roads is depicted as a polygon, and we don't have it as a sortable feature, largely because it's a continuous thing. And we also feel like roads are always a priority. And so you should be prioritizing roads and managing roads as opportunistically they get redeveloped. So when we start to prioritize, it's very, very hard to use roads as a unit of analysis to your priority. They're always a priority, and they're usually always municipally owned or state owned. Those homeowner associations would be the caveat. All right. So that's the hotspot map. So again, we can begin to sort and organize this in whatever way suits us. Yeah, Tom, was there a question?
Yeah, Joe from Hampton just pointed out that on Hampton's spreadsheet, the titles are a little different along the top. Don't know if he's the only one like that. So he's got, they have town-owned flag or town-owned and then conservation land, and then they get into like the acres and the IC acres. Is it kind of, it was sorted different for the NHLMV versus the Seacoast?
It's possible. We'll look into it and get back to you. You should have the same feature classes. They might be in a different order. One of the issues that happened is when we did this work for the NHLMV communities, we didn't have access to this aerial photography or the 1 meter resolution data. So we actually took a NOAA impervious cover data layer, and we use that for our analysis. And this is one of the things that we have to consider. We generated, some comparison between the 1 meter resolution data and the CCAP data from NOAA. And we know that the NOAA data overpredicts impervious cover. And we know that it overpredicts impervious cover by about 30 to 40%. And so that's really part of our analysis. And as we look forward into using this as a regional resource, we're going to have to keep in mind that there's going to be hierarchies of data quality. And my feeling is, as long as we can bridge these hierarchies, we can use inferior data and still be able to come up with an analysis. And again, our target is consistency here. It's not really accuracy. And that's difficult to say from an academic perspective, to de-emphasize accuracy and to emphasize precision. Invariably, the data is always going to improve, right? And there are proposals right now, and there are projects already in the works that are improving this data. So I think the key is developing this trail of breadcrumbs and this transparent procedure of how to do this with a hierarchy of data quality. All right, so let's move down to the prioritized load summary. So essentially all we've done here And it's largely through the power of some of these computer programs like Python programming language that Daniel McAdam has become, who is in my team, has become an expert in, that we were able to do just the sheer enormity of this work as easy. I say easy because, you know, we've had these conversations and Daniel's able to develop this program and then develop resources for 62 communities with the push of a button. So I know it's not easy, but this is a really powerful programming advancement that we have where we can do a lot of this analysis outside of the platform of GIS, and we can really process large amounts of data really quickly and really efficiently. And so our intention was really never to do this. We were going to hand over the hotspot maps and say, you know, just play with these and sort them by municipally owned lands. And so what Daniel's involvement in this project allowed us to do is to do a lot of this work really, really quickly. And so what we did here is we just programmed a sorting feature on top of that hotspot maps. And essentially what we're doing is we're sorting only for town-owned lands. We're unsorting conservation lands because, again, we're not identifying conservation lands as manageable area. So we want to exclude those from our analysis. So highlight conservation lands, highlight municipally owned lands, de-emphasize conservation lands, and then sort by decreasing order from high to low impervious cover. And so that's what this spreadsheet provides you. You have the same features, right? So you have these properties that are listed, and you have the pollutant load potential in sediment, phosphorus, and nitrogen. And then through some of our comments, we prioritize these. So essentially, you'll see in the report, we kind of put a bow on a lot of this analysis, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But you can, again, use this, sort this, and use this for MS4 compliance. We also added, just because it was easy, we're using essentially the same crediting scheme that EPA has developed for structural BMPs, and we're using an optimal sizing criteria of anywhere from physical storage capacity of 0.1 inches to 0.4 inches. And we're basically managing and assessing the size of the BMP that we would need to manage this particular parcel. And so we're adding different scenarios, again, a minimum scenario and an optimized scenario of addressing sediment, nitrogen, and phosphorus. So this is basically giving you, with a physical storage capacity of 0.4 inches, you can remove 55 pounds of nitrogen, 87 pounds of phosphorus annually from this. Sorry, I got that backwards. 87 pounds of nitrogen and 8.86 pounds of phosphorus from this property. We also provide an estimated cost of that. And again, this is all using that horizontal, the variable design storage volume, which links all the resources that EPA Region 1 has developed, from the removal efficiency to actually the cost estimation. And then you have a georeferenced shape or georeferenced polygon information. And I thought there was and then the street address. So one of the things we scrub from this is the owner. So we are not showing owner. In this case, these top 20 or so areas should be municipally owned. And what was really interesting is we did all this programming and modeling and data reduction. And for the municipally owned lands, we kept coming up with the same properties over and over again. It was the high school, it was the middle school, it was the elementary school, it was the fire station, the police station, the town hall, and the municipal complex, the DPW yard. And we kind of chuckled at each other because we're like, you know, this is even easier than we thought. So even if you didn't do any of this, you know, we could generate a pretty comprehensive list of municipally owned properties to start with. All right. So those are the two products that we've developed. And there's a couple of other things I'd like to point out, I guess, on that sorted project. Where did that go? There it is. And it's this tab here. So what we did is, again, Daniel used the same type of knee of the curve analysis that is used for prioritizing and optimizing BMP sizing using the pollutant curves. And he applied this to the area of municipally owned manageable impervious cover. And so for Salem, again, if you were going to develop, and this is something that would be required, again, if you're moving into a nutrient source identification report or a lake phosphorus control plan, you need to develop a target. And so we provided you with a target, and we used the same type of analysis, the optimization analysis, where we target the knee of the curve. And for Salem, and this is going to be different for every community, if you take the first 26 municipally owned properties, you are managing basically 86% of your manageable impervious cover and the load that comes from it. So you might not get to that, certainly within the permit term. But again, we're setting a target where there might not be a implementation target set. So we're starting to build out, you know, the elements of a watershed management plan here. So I'll get back to that. Did it go back to my presentation? Jeez, this is seamless here. All right. So now I just wanted to go into Ms4 applicability, because again, this is why we did it. And there are various elements of the Ms4 permit, depending on whether you know, the nature of your surface receiving waters. So if you do not have any water quality limited water bodies, and you do not have any TMDLs, first, congratulations. Life is good. That's not the majority of us. There is this section 2.3.6.e, that's what it is in the New Hampshire permit, that says within 4 years from the effective date of the permit, the permittee shall inventory and prioritize and rank their permittee owned properties and evaluate them for retrofitability. That's exactly what I just showed you. So we're done. And the report that we produce was designed so you could print it out and attach it in compliance with this section to your Ms4 permit. Now, we did the easy part. Now it's up to you to do the implementation part. And again, for those folks that do not have water quality limited water bodies or TMDLs, the bar is relatively low. You have to do one implementation effort by year 6. So yeah, that is not the majority of us. A lot of us are captured in Appendix H, which is we have an impairment and no TMDL. So that's called a water quality limited surface water. And you're just following what's outlined in Appendix H. And that involves a more robust analysis and a little bit more sophisticated approach. It involves the development of a nutrient source identification report. The majority of Appendix H people are within the seacoast, and we're all captured by the Great Bay permit, or sorry, by the Great Bay impairment. Those 12 communities that have already been enrolled into the adaptive management program embodied in the Great Bay General Nitrogen permit are already well along their way to satisfying this through their adaptive management plans. And if you did not develop a comprehensive plan, well, we invite you to pick up the resources here and to use these as the start of your program. And again, we're focusing on managing municipally owned lands and prioritizing and ranking municipally owned lands, as we see that as the easiest starting point to get into the implementation game. So within 5 years, you're going to develop, again, focusing on your permanently owned properties, I say nutrient source identification report. It's if you have a nitrogen impairment, it's a nitrogen source identification report, where in addition to everything that we just went over for 2.3.6.e, now you have to do these additional criteria where you have an estimated cost of redevelopment or retrofit, and you already know that that is provided, and the engineering and regulatory feasibility of redevelopment or retrofit. That is not provided. And there is a subcommittee meeting right now to discuss what exactly this means. So in its simplest form, the engineering and regulatory feasibility is looking at your list of prioritized municipally owned lands and assessing, one, whether they have a BMP already. If they do, then great. There's, you've done your work. If you've recently, like Newmarket or Dover, updated your school and included BMPs, that is wonderful. Great job. Make sure those get into PTAP, because it's a huge advancement. For Newmarket alone, it represented a disconnection of over 9 acres of effective impervious area. So the engineering feasibility can be as simple as a site walk, saying, can we do something here? Or it can be more robust. But again, the hotspot maps are the starting point. We've given you a target, and we've identified the land areas to investigate. So Appendix F, am I going to pass this over to you now, Sally?
I think so, Jamie. And I can talk about the lake and pond phosphorus control stuff and how this information is applicable, but I'm wondering if we should just take a quick pause and do some of the questions that are in the chat, and then we can get back to lake and pond stuff.
Yeah, it's a good time to take a breather, and
Yeah.
I think we have the time to address any questions. It's a lot of information.
We do have a few questions in the chat. So Zach from the Southern New Hampshire Regional Planning Commission was wondering if we could share the crosswalk for the individual land use codes and the generalized ones, if that's something we could put on the blog.
Yep, absolutely. So in general, that's also in Appendix F of the permit generally, right? So there is something that crosswalks typical granite JS categories to the pollutant load export rates. However, we do have a much more detailed crosswalk that we can provide, and that's a good. We should make that available. So,
all right, and maybe we can put it right on the top of the hotspot page so people don't lose it in the list. So we'll get that up there, and I can email that to you, Zach, when that's up as well.
Yeah, and I think that is the epitome of why we want to do this, because if it becomes apparent that maybe we're doing a miscategorization, this should be publicly available so that we can always change it if need be. And we know that this information is going to continually change. We're waiting for the latest impervious cover assessment, which is going to come out. So we're going to need an efficient and effective way of reproducing these data sets when the information advances, and it's going to be advancing quicker and quicker.
Awesome. And then we have another question from Christine Binger from Geo Insight. She wants to know, what if the town does not have parcel data?
So, yeah, great question. And there are a couple towns that do not. And in our analysis, we don't have a way forward. However, as I discussed, if we had it to do over again, we would likely develop a baseline layer that would be geo-referenced spatially, like a meter by meter section, so that we could still develop information that would be useful if you didn't have a parcel feature. And I should also note that there are currently discussions to develop a regional HRU map for Region 1. So it's something that, you know, we would like to do eventually.
All right, and then one last question from April Talon. She said the priority list for each municipally owned land doesn't account for existing BMPs that are already there, correct? For example, if you already have BMPs at your library or park.
That is absolutely right. And this is what I termed, so we provide a list and a target. If you've done it, that's great. Get credit for the good work that you've done. Submit those into your tracking and accounting database. I talked about this engineering and regulatory feasibility as the one step for Appendix H communities that we haven't done, and this can't do. Just the level of information we can't know through the data layers that we have whether or not you have a BMP on that. So that's the additional evaluation that you will have to do. If you've done that retrofit already, then that comes off the list. And so you move down to the next one. So that engineering and regulatory feasibility is really that going through your list and culling the efforts that you've already completed and prioritizing the ones that are left to do.
And then we do have one more question. Sarah Skitscavage, I can never say your last name, Sarah. I'm sorry if I just butchered it. Just asked, as a GIS person, she's hoping to join these tables to the parcels and maps that they already have. But before she goes down that road for their region, is there an intention to do so under the project and distribute it as a GIS layer to all of our MS4 communities?
Ooh, that one has stumped me. I am not a GIS person, and so I would have to phone a friend.
Jamie, maybe I can answer that one.
Thank you.
So actually in the prioritized summary spreadsheet, the second spreadsheet that Jamie showed, the very last column that says polygon, the header is geometry. That is actually the GIS geometry that you need to merge those two. So you can import this spreadsheet and then we'll bring in that polygon column as a GIS layer.
Sarah here, thank you for that. Yeah, so my thinking was actually a little bit different. I was going to use the parcel ID and just join it up to the T-squared mosaic data that exists. Probably different ways to, get to that. But, in my mind, it's always easiest, more comfortable to work with spatial data in a GIS. So, if that is something that our communities are interested in the Nashua region, certainly you can talk to me. I'm probably gonna pursue that mapping exercise. Just so, when you're talking about a parcel, you can now actually look at it on a map as well as all this good attribute information regarding the pollution load.
Yeah, that's great. And one of the things that's interesting is as we build out this data set, we're finding applications that we didn't think of. And again, I think this is the challenge for all of us, is to develop a transparent and consistent resource that moves us all forward and that we continue to build on and advance in very productive and additive ways.
Yeah, and I think I can add on to that, and maybe we can, I can add on to that a little bit, and then we can transition into lake and pond stuff. Is that, you know, as Jamie mentioned early on, the hotspot spreadsheets were, the whole idea for this came about in 2012, well before any of these permits came around. And really the idea was we were looking for inexpensive ways to do watershed planning work. So watershed planning work, you know, you have to identify and quantify sources of pollution. And we were finding running, you know, high-end models to sort of predict this stuff and then help us predict where BMPs go. It was cumbersome, it was expensive, and it didn't always get us to the outcomes that we wanted. So we were looking around for sort of easier ways to get to the same place. You know, how do you figure out where to go and get the biggest bang for your buck when it comes to implementation on the ground? Implementation being constructing BMPs that you direct water into so that it gets cleaned up, right? And so that's how hotspots came about. And as we kind of worked on it through the years, it evolved into a tool. We thought, hey, this might have applicability for folks who have to do compliance first for MS4. And then as Great Bay came online, it was like, well, maybe there are aspects of this data, these data sets that could be useful to Great Bay towns that have to do additional compliance. So in saying all of that, I think, you know, much like the PTAP tool that Jamie mentioned, the Great Bay Pollution Tracking and Accounting Database, a lot of this stuff is still pretty experimental. I mean, I think a lot of this is a work in progress. We don't even know if towns out there are going to want this stuff or use it or, you know, manipulate it, or if it's going to work for you. And so this is really sort of an initial like toe in the water, so to speak, to see if these tools are going to be useful. For one, they are free. And they are consistent with methods that are outlined in the MS4 permit. So they have those two things going for them, but how they are used and who uses them and, you know, sort of additional enhancements that need to be added to them to make them more functional, that is all going to have to kind of roll out as we move forward in using these tools. So I just say that as a way of hoping that folks will understand that, you know, these are a work in progress, and we are excited that people are interested in using them. And there are going to be things like, hey, how do we turn this into a, you know, a GIS based tool? You know, if that's a need, then potentially maybe that's where we go next. But right now, you know, DES has funded a lot of the development of this work. The towns have kicked in some money. And I think, like I said before, we're sort of just at the dawn of using this information. So how they grow and evolve over time, I think, is something that we journey on together, if you will, so to speak. So I just wanted to put that out there, and then I'm going to kind of pause for a second because I just said a lot, and I'm going to just kind of look to Jamie because he's the co-partner and kind of the lead on all of this to see if what I said was correct. And if you'd like to correct me, if anything I said wasn't right or was sort of off the rails, to like chime in and go ahead and do that. And then we'll get into lake and pond stuff.
No, I think you nailed it.
All right, thanks, Jamie. I mean, I'm just a watershed planner, you know, so it's like, this is exciting stuff for us to be working on together, because I do think there is utility in the tool. Jamie and I have worked together to look at ways to use the hotspot spreadsheets for MS4 compliance related to lake and pond TMDLs. So take a look at this list in front of you. It came right out of Appendix F. And if you're on this list, lucky you, because you are subject to requirements that will include the development of a lake and pond phosphorus control plan as outlined in Appendix F for lake and pond phosphorus management. So if you're on this list, it's possible that these data sets could help you achieve the requirements that are outlined in Appendix F for lake and pond TMDLs. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to talk a little bit about, I'm going to crosswalk the information that's in the spreadsheets with the requirements in Appendix F for lake and pond phosphorus TMDLs. And then I'm going to step through a real world example that Jamie and I worked on in partnership with Rockingham Planning Commission and a consulting firm to actually do this for a lake that is under a phosphorus TMDL. So if you look at the slide in front of you, these are some components of the 18 component lake and phosphorus control plan requirements that are in Appendix F of the MS4 permit. And I've called out, what is that, 5 that we believe hotspots data can be useful for helping you develop elements of your lake and phosphorus control plan that's required under Appendix F. I will say that if you look closely at Appendix F, you have 2 options for actually developing a phosphorus control plan. You can either do the Lake and Pond Phosphorus Control Plan framework that EPA outlines in Appendix F, or you can develop what's called an alternative phosphorus control plan. That's another option that you can do, but I can guarantee you, if you do the other option, the alternative plan, you probably are going to have to show how you're going to reduce pollution on the ground. You're going to have to quantify the phosphorus load reductions that you think you're going to get, and you're going to have to show the area that you are going to reduce phosphorus loading from, and then you're going to have to tie it back to load reductions in the TMDL. So while that might be a more free-form exercise than following the lake phosphorus control plan framework that's in Appendix F, I think many of the steps that are in the LPCP in Appendix F are going to be required in the alternative plan. I don't think that doing an alternative plan is going to get you away from having to quantify phosphorus load reductions. So I'm going to pause for a second and let that sink in. And then I'm going to turn back to the lake phosphorus control plan requirements in Appendix F. So one of the components of the LPCP is to define that area of your lake phosphorus control plan. And that's simply the geographic area that you're going to be focusing on for attaining your phosphorus load reductions. And we believe that you can sort the hotspot data so that you can figure out what parcels are in the watershed area that are also in your town that drain to the TMDL water body. So that's what you're trying to define. You're trying to figure out in your town, you're going to have some parcels that are in the watershed of the lake that's subject to the TMDL. Some are not. So you don't really want to do management on those because you're not going to get any bang for your buck because they're not draining to the pond that's subject to the TMDL. So you sort the spreadsheet to figure out which parcels are in that TMDL watershed area. And you can do that simply by manipulating the data set and figuring out geographically which ones are in the TMDL watershed area. There is an option in the permit that says you can sort for just parcels that are in the urbanized area. And I think Jamie and I feel like that might be kind of a false choice because TMDLs apply to a watershed. They don't just apply to an urbanized area. But that is a discussion we may have as this rolls out. What does it mean, the difference programmatically in these 2 different areas, options that you can do under the LPCP. But for now, I think it's easiest to think of taking that spreadsheet, the hotspot spreadsheet, and figuring out which parcels in your municipality drain to the TMDL water body. Once you've done that, you can then do the work that's needed for component 4. You can calculate the baseline phosphorus load that comes off of those parcels that drain to that TMDL water body. So that geographic area that's draining to your TMDL water body, you can calculate a phosphorus load from those parcels. So basically you would just sort all those parcels out of the spreadsheet and then add up what the phosphorus load is estimated to be coming from those parcels. Once you have that number, it's super easy to run the related equations that are required by Appendix F to determine what the allowable load is that you can get, allowable phosphorus load off those parcels. And then what the reduction is, the phosphorus reduction is that you need to get from those parcels in order to meet your allowable load. So you have an allowable load, that's how much you're allowed to discharge. And then the reduction is the number that of phosphorus reduction number that you need to meet to get to your allowable load. So once you have that baseline load, which you can derive from the spreadsheets, you can calculate, you can run the equations for the other 2 numbers. Component 5 of the lake phosphorus control plan, and I'm assuming as I said before, probably all the steps that I've mentioned so far are also relevant if you're going to do an alternative plan. I think you're going to have to show all this stuff either way, either path you take. You're going to have to show how you're going to get reductions and what those estimates are going to be. It's very similar to watershed planning. If anyone out there has done a watershed plan, you know the process is the same. Identify the load, quantify, identify sources of phosphorus loading, quantify it, and determine what the reductions are needed in order to meet your target. It's very similar. So component 5, a description of planned structural and non-structural control. So we think the spreadsheets have utility for, as Jamie pointed out before, for identifying where in your LPCP area you are going to be able to implement, construct BMPs to attain your phosphorus load reductions. So what you would do is what Jamie demonstrated earlier. You take a look at your prioritized spreadsheets, right? You'd sort them for all the parcels that are in your LPCP area, and then you'd figure out which ones had the highest phosphorus loading. And then you would have to actually do some on-the-ground field assessment or engineering assessment to determine whether or not which of those parcels are suitable for management, because they're not all going to be. Some might have a BMP on them, as we mentioned earlier, or some might just not be places that you're able to implement a management control. Once you've done that, once you've done your field reconnaissance or you've met with people in the town to determine what that list looks like, you will have a list of priority properties to go out and do management work. And then you could even use the tool that's in the prioritized loading spreadsheet to help you estimate costs. So the tool, the costing and sizing tool that's built in there can further help you refine that list by further refining load reductions and also potential costs for anything that you might want to install on the ground. A lot of this is theoretical, so you have to take that, you got to take this with a grain of salt, right? A lot of it is totally theoretical. You're generating these lists and, a lot of it is estimate sort of planning level work, but still you are going to get a list of potential places to go out and get phosphorus control implementation accomplished.
So Sally, I guess
yes, thanks.
I would just jump in and ask the question, when has it ever not been theoretical?
Yeah, you mean planning like this? Yes. Oh, let's not get started on that.
I'm just trying to draw the equivalent here across, like, even if you're going by the book and doing A through I watershed management plan development without implementing, it's always going to be theoretical, because you could, we've seen BMPs propose that it possibly the municipality can't maintain or, have no interest in maintaining or owning.
Yeah, and on top of that too, Jamie, I think a great example of that is like possibly Berry Brook. A lot of fancy models were run to predict BMP type and location. And in the end, the reality is that after the models were run and, the BMPs were identified and we went out on the ground to actually dig the holes and do the work, very few of them went in as predicted by the model, either because the location wasn't appropriate or because the BMP that was recommended by the model wasn't appropriate. So, I think this method is nice because it's gonna generate a list. You're gonna vet it at the local level and you're gonna determine what is practical for you as a municipality to implement, is my sense and my take on it. Jamie, do you want to add to that?
No, well, the only thing I would say is we've seen that progress has been lacking towards these TMDLs. And, for whatever reason, what we're trying to do is bite off a little chunk. And again, I personally, based on a lot of our previous work, feel that implementation is really important to plan your future implementation efforts. So you need to bite off a chunk at a time so that you can gain the experience and understand what works and what doesn't work in your land area. And that can inform adaptive next steps. And so realistically, we haven't talked about it, but this adaptive management approach is really innovative and it's really cutting edge in my mind, right? where it's allowing us to implement, measure, and then adapt. And we feel like it's the best approach for any TMDL.
Yeah, absolutely. So component 13 of the LPCP is a performance evaluation, and that just means tracking and doing the accounting for the load reductions you're achieving based on implementation. So we think that, you know, the spreadsheets obviously set you up to do that evaluation and tracking, but also the tool that Jamie mentioned earlier, the pollution tracking and accounting project database, which is sort of a sister effort and project to hotspot maps, could be used by lake and pond TMDL towns. So as you're implementing, you could be entering your implementation efforts into the PTAP database, which uses accounting methods from Appendix F to generate load reductions. And that's how you would fulfill that particular requirement. So the LPCP and the lake phosphorus control planning work is kicking off now. I mean, I think that in years 4 and 5, you need to be working on these plans. So I think that if there's interest out there from towns that are on that list that are covered by these requirements, that we could take this information and do further trainings to help municipalities with these aspects of using this data for these aspects of lake phosphorus control planning. We know that, a 5-minute talk by me talking like water coming out of a fire hose is not going to get you to the place where you're going to be able to do this, right off the bat. And so if more help is needed, and if there's modifications that we need to make further to these data sets to enable you to use them for this work, we will do that. We just want to be sure there's a sort of a need and an interest out there and an understanding of what these requirements basically are. So I encourage everyone who's on that list to start taking a look at Appendix F to see kind of, what's required. Jamie, take us to the next slide. So Jamie and I, as I mentioned earlier, we worked with some partners down in the southern part of New Hampshire to actually use the hotspots spreadsheets information to do this kind of work for Country Pond. Country Pond is located in the towns of Kingston and Newton. It is a TMDL pond, and we were working under the auspices of watershed planning with the thought that the information could then potentially be leveraged by the Ms4s for assistance with their work. The first thing that we did was we sorted the hotspots data to figure out which parcels in Newton and Kingston were draining to the pond. Because I mentioned earlier, not all of them in your town are going to be in the TMDL pond watershed. So we sorted the spreadsheet data to figure out which parcels in Newton and Kingston were in the watershed. And then we prioritize those parcels based on pollutant loading rate, or IC. So which ones in theory were generating the highest pollutant load and could be managed? Meaning, as Jamie mentioned earlier, you're not going to manage conservation lands because there's no impervious cover there. They're just big tracts of lands that inherently generate a lot of pollutant load. So you really want to find those parcels that have IC that are delivering pollution in theory to the water body. So we generated a prioritized list, which is kind of what you see in front of you. And then we took, except our list that we generated was a lot bigger because we did that field assessment. We did that engineering feasibility work. We actually went out on the ground with folks from the Lake Association, from the towns, from our consulting folks with Rockingham Planning Commission. And we walked around and we kind of figured out which places were feasible to do implementation work or to construct BMPs to reduce phosphorus loading to the water body. So we did have to do that piece. And then Jamie, if you could pop up the circles. So the parcels that are circled in red are actually going to move forward to implementation in the next year or so. So this is kind of an example of, an effort where we started at the planning level, just, identifying sources of phosphorus loading to the TMDL water body. and then further refining that list down into priority parcels for management activity. And then what happened is that the Lake Association worked with the municipalities to select 2 of these priority properties that were feasible for implementation efforts. These BMPs will be constructed in the next couple of years. So I just wanted to put that out there as an example of how the spreadsheet information can be used from planning all the way through to implementation. So that's kind of exciting. You know, a lot of times I think this information just sits and doesn't go anywhere, but as Jamie mentioned earlier, I think the big thing about all of this is taking this information and making sure we're constructing things that are actually reducing pollutant loading to these target water bodies. And with that, I'm going to stop because I've just said a lot and I've said it really fast. And I want to see if there are any, should we do questions, Jamie, or should we just go into reporting and then circle back to questions? How do you want to do that part of it?
Sure. Yeah, there's nothing in the chat, but
okay.
I
No
think we could
questions about lake and pond phosphorus TMDLs? Or was I just so confusing and that no one has any questions? Come on.
Well, we should ask if anyone wants to verbally relay that. So maybe by a show of hands. If anyone has a question.
Woo!
Bless you.
Wow. I will say that we can do follow-up, you know, training and workshops for this. Like I said earlier, there's a lot of information here. So, and you know, the Zoom format is always weird. You can't look to see. Mostly I put people to sleep, but I can't tell because we're on Zoom, so I can't see you all. But anyways, still trying to have a little humor.
And Sally, I would add to thank you for noting your continued guidance and trainings for the future, because I think that's probably going to be critical. And we'll be discussing this at the Stormwater Coalition meetings as well. So all of you be prepared for myself and Tom and others querying you, maybe doing some poll questions on that specific topic.
Yeah, because I think, thanks, Deb, that would be really awesome. Because I think what we want to know is that there's a need. One thing we don't want to do is make a product that's not going to be useful for people. And, you know, granted, a lot of what we're doing, you know, it's free, it's available for use and available for manipulation sort of as municipalities see fit. And we can continue to help municipalities if there's a need and an interest. So we've been at this a long time, and, you know, we think it has utility, and, you know, we would continue to help folks use it and grow the product, but only if there's an interest in it and a need for it. And I just say this as someone who's spent a lot of time raising money for this product. You know, we just want to make sure that folks are going to use it and that it is useful, and we can help with trainings, and we can evolve it and continue to make it useful if there's interest.
All right. Thanks, Sally. So I'm going to transition to the final product that actually I think we just finalized and put up on the website probably last Friday, about a week ago today. And we're really excited about it because, again, for those of you out there that are not GIS analysts, are not watershed specialists, and are really just interested in, you know, what is your next step, then this report is really the culmination of everything that we've discussed, distilled into an easy to read plan for you that can be submitted as compliance with those sections of the MS4 permit that we've all discussed. Understanding that, you know, for the water quality limited waters or for the TMDLs, there may need to be some additional assessment, such as that engineering and regulatory feasibility assessment. Or have you done anything on that property, and can you do anything on that property? That obviously you're going to have to do. So if we go back to the blog, and you know, whether or not you land on this or not, we go to New Hampshire Resources, pollutant load maps, hotspot maps, and then you can scroll through the variety of hotspot maps that have been developed. And I think I'm going to pick on Dover this time because I saw that Gretchen joined. And I'm just going to click on this report. So this is the priority rank parcel summary report. And all this is a simple distillation of all the information that was in the prioritized ranking form, included with a narrative. And what we tried to do is be explicit as possible. We reference the purpose, we reference the sections for you that this applies to in the MS4. We reference our methods, how we built this tool, how we did the analysis, how we prioritize this land and the land uses. And then we show the results. So you'll see, you know, for Dover, we provided a target of 21 municipally owned lands. Again, not all of them are on the table anymore. We know that the high school and the middle school just came off the table, but we're giving you a target. And this is, we feel, is a good way. This isn't saying, you know, you're going to do everything, because there's a point of diminishing returns. We're saying target the top 21 parcels, and then you'll have treated, sorry, that comes to 22, and you'll have treated 89% of the manageable load generated from your municipally owned impervious cover. Then we consolidate the performance estimates, and we say, if you manage those top 22 parcels, here are your reductions that can be attainable. So over 1,300 pounds per year of nitrogen, over 138 pounds per year of phosphorus, and an overall cost. So, you know, 3.3 million. So it's not insignificant. Again, this isn't, you're not going to get there next year, but this is a long-term plan that we feel gives you a manageable target towards compliance with this. It likely won't get you across the finish line, but it gets you started and gives you a sense in all the analytical terms and metrics that EPA likes to see. So we have costs, we have load reduction, we have target implementation efforts, and then we have the list of properties. So again, this is something that is designed to comply with that 2.3.6.e. And we think you can just submit this, and you know, you can target one of these properties in year 6. If you are in Appendix H, then you're into a more sophisticated approach, and many communities are already there. At least the 12 communities that run the 13 wastewater treatment plants in the Great Bay have already considered this as part of their adaptive management plan. And if you haven't, well, then here's a target to include in your adaptive management plan in the next iterations. And so, and that's the end of the report. So again, for Appendix H, you would be reviewing this list and adding your engineering and feasibility, and that can be added as another table or another section to this report. It's not something that we've provided, but we've provided the starting point. And this would be the list that you give your staff or your engineer or your consultant that you hire. Please develop the engineering and regulatory feasibility for these properties. And that's Appendix H. And I think Sally went into great detail on the additional hurdle you would have for the lake and pond phosphorus control plan. So that is the cue the fireworks. That's the product that we're unveiling and offering. And we hope that you're as excited to start to use these tools as we are.
So Jamie, if I could just add one thing that folks might be wondering too. So you showed the number of parcels for Dover, it's 22. But just so that everybody understands, it's not like a top 22 list. Each community will have a different number of those projects that are priority projects.
Exactly. Yeah. So we've been, in other areas, it really depends on the number of municipal parcels and the acreage of impervious cover that you have. So if we did that analysis, I didn't show it, but I would assume for a community like Danville, it's going to be lower. So instead of 22, they're probably going to have 3 to 5.
I have a question.
Yes.
Brandon Bover, Town of Bedford. So I think I missed how you do that calculation. So what is the equation? Is it the top 25%? What is the math behind it, I guess, so we could quantify?
Yep, great. So what we do is so if you think of the order of operations here, we're targeting impervious cover and impervious cover in municipally owned lands, and then we rank them. And then in that rank order is your distribution. So here are all your properties. So in Dover, I don't know what the final list is. It's somewhere around 50 to 60 parcels. And then we find the tangent or the knee of the curve here, which represents the inflection point where this curve begins to flatten out. And that inflection point in our prioritization scheme represents a optimized target, meaning that if you hit this target, you'll have most efficiently expended funds for the greatest amount of impervious cover disconnection and pollutant load management. Beyond that, you start to get, as the curve flattens out, you start to get diminishing returns. And again, this is something where, you could target everything. Whether that is economically feasible or not is really the question. So to get started, particularly on municipally owned lands, that's the process that we've identified. And it's the same process that is used in optimizing BMP performance and BMP sizing using the EPA Regional 1 performance curves. So we felt it was a adapt application of their process.
So for Bedford, I realized that you made a chart for, it looks like each community specifically. So I don't really actually have to go do any of the math. So I can just kind of start with that and see what that looks like.
Yeah. If I can go back to that website. And Bedford will be easy because you're a B. So for Bedford, there's your report. And again, a lot of the information is the same because the methods are all uniform, but you're targeting 13 parcels, and that's 86% of your manageable impervious cover.
So that's the top 13 ranked by IC acreage.
That's correct.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep. And again, we just like to have targets, and we like to have methods by which we defend selection of those targets. And this seems like a really applicable method that's very consistent with other prioritization approaches embodied in the MS4 permit. So I think we're back down to our final meme, which is the ship sailing in the fog. And we're really happy of all the momentum that's happened in the region. And I think our congratulations go out to all of the regulated communities, because the way you've banded together and used resources and advanced the standard of practice has been just really fun to watch and to be witness to. So I believe we thought we would, I mean, that's the content that we have to cover. As Sally said, we'll stay on the line and we're open to questions. Feel free to unmute yourself or raise your hand or add something to the chat. And, you know, let us know how to make this more useful for you.
Mr. Landry has his hand up.
Thank you for recognizing me, Chair Loisel. Great job, Jamie and Sally, as always, presenting this information and its practical nature for users across the board here. And the question I have for Sally, who labeled herself a mere humble watershed supervisor today, I find that comical because you're far greater than that. But well played. Can you just convey to me selfishly as an NPS program manager, you know, the boxes that the tool ticks off relative to 9 elements? Because, you know, when you start stewing together TMDL, you know, phosphorus TMDL water bodies, plus hotspot mapping, you know, plus communities that are working with, you know, our nonprofit partners to get watershed-based planning done. And forgive me if I missed it, but as you said, there was a fire hose of information today fired out here. But, you know, this achieves some good ground on ticking off those 9 element boxes, correct?
Yeah, I think so. And I think Jamie does too, because we've used hotspot spreadsheets now to assist with 2 A through I watershed planning elements. So for folks on the meeting who are not familiar with the A through I watershed planning process, it's an EPA 9-element watershed planning process that watersheds have to go through in order to be eligible for 319 funding for implementation to construct or implement other BMPs. So it's kind of, it's like a recipe that you follow, very similar to the lake phosphorus control plan steps that are in Appendix F. And so the elements that we leverage the hotspot spreadsheets for to sort of help us further develop those elements are element A, identify pollution causes and sources. Now, we already had a TMDL, and we knew for both of the lakes that we've worked on before, we'd either run the lake loading response model or we had a TMDL that identified sort of at the broad level what the sources of pollution were, but sorting the spreadsheets helped us sort of further prioritize which parcels might be higher loading within the realm of the various sources of pollution. Estimate the pollution reductions needed to achieve your goal. Watershed plans are like TMDLs. You know, you set a water quality goal for the water body and you determine what needs to be done on the ground to meet that goal, whether it's a reduction in phosphorus loading or a hold the load. And spreadsheets can be useful for that. The spreadsheets can be useful for that because you can sort of, as Jamie showed, Daniel built a tool into them that helps you estimate what the potential load reductions would be under various BMP, structural BMP implementation scenarios. So you can start to kind of build a picture of what the load reductions might be as you start doing implementation on the ground. Element C, which is actions needed to reduce pollution. As I showed you from the country pond list, you know, that I think is really the strength of these spreadsheet sorts. Excuse me, I have drank a lot of coffee today. So the spreadsheet sorts, you take that prioritized list and you take it out on the ground, or you meet with local folks to sort of refine the list and come up with your action items that you want to do on the ground to reduce pollution loading to the water body, and costs as well, because we have that cost estimating tool now in the spreadsheet. So I think that the reality is that these spreadsheets are a great tool for watershed planning because it can start to kind of help you get at those elements. You know, is it going to fully satisfy all of the work that you need to do to complete those elements? No, but they are definitely going to be a very good foundational tool that you can use in watershed planning. So Steve, I would say if we have towns or or I'm sorry, if we have watershed planning projects that are in towns for which we have these spreadsheets, we should certainly leverage them.
Yeah, and I would say, but wait, there's more, because we also are providing an implementation schedule, right? We're targeting, again, we're not getting you across the finish line. We're not saying do this plan and you'll be done. We're saying do this plan and you'll have started. So that implementation schedule is provided in that report. It's giving you and telling you, let's start with your municipal owned properties because you have control over them, and that's the lowest hanging fruit. These are also getting to G. These are interim milestones, right? And then that monitoring and assessment. Now, we're not really addressing monitoring assessment, but we do create a tracking and accounting, at least to interimly quantify the load reductions associated with your implementation efforts. And I think I left out, and so then getting to I, the plan effectiveness, is just, I guess that's a component of it. So we're not monitoring the water body, that will have to be done, but we are giving you a model that can approximate and estimate the load reductions associated with your implementation efforts.
Thank you both. That's huge. I mean, that's, that touches on over half of the required elements, and that on the monitoring concept is always kind of, usually we're partnering with municipalities or groups that are doing that anyway through volunteer monitoring programs or other permit, requirements, that's sort of in the background, like an assumption that it's getting done. So I don't worry about that as much, but this provides a lot of that solid backbone that gets the meat on the bones of a watershed-based plan. So it's pretty exciting because I think it makes it achievable, certainly more affordable, and keeps it local. The people that can work on it and use this tool, they're familiar with it. They see the prioritization get developed, and I think that just leads to better ownership of the plan and getting stuff done on the ground. So kudos for making this so applicable across many fronts, you guys. It's fantastic to see it rolled out today. It takes me like several iterations of your presentations to have the lights fully go on and see these connections. So I'm glad to have an opportunity to learn from you both. Thank you.
Steve, just to add on to your local point, I think, and Jamie can attest to this as well, that when we worked in Country Pond, we did develop this prioritized list of parcels with high IC and high phosphorus loading. And then we shared that list with folks from the municipalities and the Lake Association. And then we actually went out on the ground. So, there is buy-in when people can put a location to a parcel and see an address and they're like, oh, I know where that is. That's a boat launch ramp, or yeah, that's a gravel road that's eroding, or yeah, that's a place where we definitely see a lot of erosion and have problems. Let's go look at that. That I think that's just watershed planning at its best. It's that's where people get really excited. And that's the list that I showed was the output of an effort like that, an effort that involved multiple local partners to get to that list, but it started with the hotspot spreadsheet sort.
Yeah, that's a good example, Sally. And I think the hotspot mapping also helps maybe diminish or reinforce appropriate or inappropriate finger pointing. Because, we get a lot of, oh, we know where the problems are. Do you? Or do you want to label that as a problem just because you're ticked off at your neighbor? So it's good to have some objectivity thrown in here.
Yeah, because it in theory quantifies the magnitude of the problem.
Exactly.
So the problem that they think might not be a problem, or it could be a big fat problem. So
yeah, exactly. So I think we're always looking for those tools, because a lot of people don't want to recognize that it's actually sometimes themselves or their property, but this helps kind of level the playing field.
And Jamie, I talked over you, so you should say what you're going to say.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Jamie's just crushed by your caffeine level, Sally.
All right, well, if there are no other questions, Deb, do you want to take us out?
Yes, if I could, thank you very much. First of all, thank you, Jamie and Sally, for this presentation. Having the foresight almost 10 years ago to see that this would be useful. And I'm sure it seems like a long time coming for the two of you, but we're here. I think, as you can see by the attendance today, there's a lot of excitement. I envision there will be some follow-up questions. And I thank you both for, being available for that. So I look forward to engaging further with both of you. Sally touched on briefly about the funding for this. So again, I just want to highlight that again, because without the funding, we wouldn't be here where we are today. So many thanks to DES for the funding, and then also the New Hampshire Stormwater Coalition pooled funds paid for all of the New Hampshire LMV communities to have this data available as well. We saw this as really critical. So thank you all for getting us to this point. So I just wanted to take a few minutes and talk about that critical advancement, as Jamie keeps saying, bringing it from planning to implementation. Because I see the Clean Water SRF loan program as being a potential and viable source to bring you to that implementation phase. And actually, even if you have some more planning to do, to consider that as well. So I know I'm working with many of you in meeting some of your MS4 requirements and others in order to improve water quality in your community on several Clean Water SRF loan projects. And let me tell you, there's some very engaging and exciting projects going on right now. And I know you hear from me probably several months during the year about kind of gearing you up for this potential program, but it really is a phenomenal program. And I think those municipalities that have taken advantage of it would agree. But again, I just wanted to note the connection of this work and these requirements for the MS4, that these retrofitting and priority projects that you now have a list of in your report, these are viable projects for the Clean Water SRF program. And as a reminder, if you need to finish it up on the planning stage a little bit, we have those projects that fall under Clean Water SRF planning can bring a project up to 30% design, or just planning to get you to an overall water quality improvement in your community. And right now, and in the past, it has brought with it $75,000 of principal forgiveness. Could that dollar amount change? It could. I'll continue to let you know, but I'm pretty confident that that number will stay at least where it is, potentially grow. And then the infrastructure incentive, that's where it addresses the implementation, as Jamie's talking about. So that can bring you to and through final design, permitting, and construction. And in the past years, that has had 10 to 15% of the total loan amount for principal forgiveness. So each year it varies a little bit, but again, you're still getting a really good principal or loan forgiveness associated with an infrastructure project. I'm going to share with you, for those of you who haven't seen the guidance document, you might want to just take a look at it. It's a really easy read, 2 pages, and it just gives an overview of the Clean Water SRF loan stormwater and wastewater planning guidance document. There's some minimum criteria that you need to meet, some core elements. They're not that hard to meet. And I see some smiles. So I know that those communities I'm working with agree with that. But our next round for Clean Water SRF will be the 2022 round. I should have more information in March. But traditionally, the pre-applications are due either at the beginning or middle of June. But I'm here to tell you, it's never too early to plan. I highly encourage you, you know, to really think about some planning projects. Jamie and Sally just showed you a report that shows the priority areas or projects, and it gave you dollar amounts. When you submit the pre-application, you don't have to have the full work scope together. So this is a great tool that you already have available. So please, 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 I encourage you, if you have any questions about the program, if you have a project in mind, let's start talking now. And the other thing I want to say is that we keep hearing internally at DES, there are likely going to be some other funding opportunities. And some of these will likely be going through the Clean Water SRF program. There may be some additional grant opportunities in addition to the loan program. And we continue to get information on a pretty regular basis. So I think there's going to be more funding opportunities coming down the pike. So again, even more reason to start planning now, get ready. And some of those grant opportunities will likely go through the Clean Water SRF program in order to, you know, kind of vet through and prioritize those projects. So again, just want to hammer in, never too early. Also be thinking about maybe putting forth a warrant article for your March 2022 for the authority to borrow, so that you're ahead of the game. And I think that's all I had. Again, I am always available and happy to address any questions relative to projects for the Clean Water SRF loan program. My colleague Katie Zink is also a project manager as well for stormwater projects. So between the two of us, please feel free to reach out. So I don't know if anyone has any questions right now about the Clean Water SRF program and how these projects or any MS4 work would fit into that.
So far, nothing in the chat, but.
All right, again, I'm always available. So just pop me an email, give me a ring.
Excellent. So I guess we can give back 10 minutes to your Friday.
Thank you. Have a good weekend, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for joining, everyone.
Thank you. This is very helpful and timely. I appreciate it.
Good job, everybody.
Good.